Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is and wherever in the world you may be. My name is Matt Wynn, your podcast host and resident secure identities nerd. Welcome to another episode of HID Connects. We're glad to have you back. Now, for those of you on the internet, which includes all of you because you're listening to this podcast, passwords are probably the bane of your existence, or at least they are for me. Between remembering how many special characters you use to which password goes to which account, this method of authentication is, let's just call it cumbersome, and in a lot of ways, maybe not the most secure. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about the future of online authentication, where passwords are potentially a thing of the past. Now, driving this potential future are four letters: FIDO, better known as FIDO, which is a passkey technology that provides a seamless way for users to authenticate without entering a username or password. So, helping us to explore this trend are two experts on the topic who I'm very happy to join us on the podcast today via cyberspace. So, first off, we are excited to have Andrew Shikiar, Chief Executive Officer, CEO of the FIDO Alliance. Andrew, thank you so much for joining. Tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the FIDO Alliance.
Hey, Matt, thanks for having me today. It's great to be here. So FIDO Alliance is an industry body that's been around for over 12 years now. We have hundreds of members worldwide, I think over 350 members worldwide, who all work together to help us deliver our mission, which is to reduce the world's reliance on passwords. So we've been at this for some time. We've been making great progress over the past few years as we've introduced the concept of passkeys. So obviously we'll talk more about passkeys throughout our conversation coming up, so I don't need to belabor that now. But in short, we're seeing that really transform the way that the world authenticates itself to online services and applications. About me, I've been with FIDO Alliance for around 8-9 years now. Came on to head its marketing, and my remit's grown over the years to serve as executive director and CEO. I've been in the identity space for 20-something years. And what's interesting to me is that a lot of the problems we were talking about in digital identity, say in 2001, are the same ones we're still tackling today. Passwords being one of those. And the password problem has been out there for decades. But only now, through the work that FIDO Alliance is doing and through the widespread support, across industries, across borders, have we made a dent in this? Actually, have we managed to start to address this problem at scale? So I'm looking forward to talking about this further today, and thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. Changing the world one passkey at a time. I love it. Thank you for joining. And also joining us, now this is a return episode, is Katie Bjork, Director of Communications and Solution Marketing for HID's IAMS group. So Katie, welcome back. Remind our listeners about yourself and what you do for us here at HID.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. This is always a nice visit. So at HID, a big part of my focus is actually understand how customers are using the solutions that we have, to study the market, understand the trends, and making sure that when we talk about what we do, that it actually resonates with what organizations want to do. So that's a very big part of what I do, and a very big part of why I'm so excited to talk about the FIDO Alliance here. So thanks for having me.
Of course. And my production team is groaning at me already, but I cannot help but make a dog joke as it relates to FIDO. And Katie, you are the proud owner of a truffle dog, is what I've been told. So what is that?
Oh, yeah. It's an Italian breed. They're called Lagotto Romagnolo. And they're super cute, and they're very good at finding truffles.
Amazing. And your Italian accent is fantastic, by the way. That's very, very, very noticeable. That's wonderful. I do not have any skill like that. So anyway, dog jokes aside, groans aside from the team in the studio, let's get into it. So again, guests, thank you so very, very much. So let's get started. Burning question for today's episode: what is FIDO, and how will it shape the future of authentication? So Andrew, let's start with you. Simple, straightforward definition question. What is FIDO? What does it stand for?
Yeah, so first of all, since we're talking dogs, I often get the question, is FIDO named after the dog? And it's actually not. So it is and it isn't. So FIDO stands for Fast Identity Online. And the founders of the organization, a gentleman by the name of Bill Leddy was one of these people driving this. He was at PayPal at the time. Pointed out that following the term fidelis, which is a Latin root for to trust or to verify. And so FIDO, that acronym was chosen with that in mind, right, about trust and verification, which is very interesting. Because the thing about FIDO, the name, FIDO is a dog's name, I think, also has that same root. So literally, FIDO means fast identity online. We do three things as an organization. We create technical standards, which I'm going to discuss at a pretty high level about how those work. Technical standards for user authentication and adjacent workspaces. Secondly, we run a very robust certification program that tests products to make sure that they conform to these specifications and that they work with one another, which is really important if you're in the business of, like, say, licensing software to deploy inside your enterprise or to consumers. You want to know that what you're buying, works with other products in the sense you don't have vendor lock-in or anything like that. And the third thing we do is run a lot of enablement and market adoption programs. So this includes your typical run-of-the-mill marketing mix, but also we've invested quite heavily in user experience guidelines, design guidelines, and we just launched something called Passkey Central, which is aimed at helping anyone interested in moving forward with passkeys get the resources they need to help develop their business case and help understand the strategy, the whys, and the hows of deploying passkeys. So those are the three things we do as an organization. Let me talk at a high level about how FIDO works from a security standpoint. And this really hits at the core problem that we're trying to solve. So make no mistake about it, right? The problem statement is passwords. Right? Passwords are the problem. And as I said in my intro before, we've known this for some time, right? Passwords are 60 years old. Right? How many pieces of technology do you use in your daily life that are 60 years old? And not that many. And if you take it a step further, how many pieces of technology do you use in your life that are 60 years old that are critical to your well-being and to your health and to your economic stability? Probably zero, other than passwords, right? And so we've known this has been a problem for a while. And for the past 20 or 30 years, our answer to solve this problem has been to add layers, right? So two-factor authentication, MFA, most common being, a second code on top of the password, so SMS OTP. But more recently, we've moved to stronger forms of MFA, including FIDO security keys and other methods that are far better than using a primary factor of a password alone. But the reason why passwords are weak is that it's a shared secret model, where you have a secret in your head, and then the corresponding answer is on the server. And the problem with that is literally the space in between, and that's where hackers play. They can do a number of things there. One, they can guess your password. Right? Passwords are pretty easy to guess. They could buy your password off the dark web, which is readily available. There's billions of credentials on the dark web. Or more and more frequently, they can phish your password. Right? You get an email that looks kind of reliable. It says, "Hey, you need to reset, log into your account for this or that," and you go to a site that looks like the real site you're going to, but you don't notice the difference in the URL. You type in your password, and just like that, the hacker has access to that account. Right? That's the problem with the shared secret model, is that it's open to scalable remote attacks. And by the way, this happens not just with with one-factor authentication, but also two-factor authentication. Right? What's the difference between an OTP and a password? The only difference is it's a one-time passcode, right? But it's still a shared secret, and it might not last as long. It may not be permanent, but that same model I'm talking about, where the hacker can get between you and the server, works with OTP codes as well. So imagine you go to this site, you sign in, you think you're signing the real site, the hacker relays that back to the real site. You get the OTP code, you enter it thinking you're entering into the real site, but you're not. Then they just relay that onto the real site, and bingo, they take over your account just as easily with two factors as they do with one. And so what FIDO does is use a method of technology of security called public key cryptography, which instead of putting a password on the server, we establish what's called a virtual key pair, or a key pair. What's called the public key sits on the server, and then the private key sits on the user's device. Now, unlike a password, the public key has no material value. All right, you could take my public key, damage with it. You can't put it on another site to sign in. It's a private key that holds the value. And the private key must be in the user's possession. And then only once the user verifies themselves to their device where the private key sits, so typically, say, by touching a security key or using a biometric on your handset, that's your local verification. Then the key pair can talk. Right? Then the private key talks to the public key, there's an encrypted dialogue that needs to match precisely for the authentication ceremony to be complete. Right? That's how FIDO authentication works. That's what all of our standards ultimately enable. And so the difference between that and the traditional means of shared secret authentication is that there's no way for a remote attacker to get in the middle of that dialogue. Right? So even if I click on a phishing email, which is a pretty likely thing to have happen because phishing emails are getting better and better with generative AI. Even if I click on that and I think I'm going to the real site, and I go to sign in with my private key, it can't happen because the site does not have my public key. Right? Or vice versa. Even if someone tries to sign into someone else that tries to take over my account, they maybe have a first factor credential, they don't have the private key to sign in to the site. So it breaks down, it stops that model entirely in its tracks. So it changes the threat vector entirely. And really, this possession-based form of user authentication is the key to stopping these remote attacks. And these remote attacks are the cause of data breaches. Right? These are when you hear about billions of credentials lost, you hear about hundreds of millions of accounts being shared or medical data leaking out there, or you hear about ransomware attacks. All these things stem back to knowledge-based credentials. And so I know that's a very long tangent, but this is what we do, right? So our technical specifications enable this. They stop remote attacks, full stop.
That is an excellent overview. Katie, go ahead, please.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to add, because, Andrew, you hit something really important there. You said these attacks or these risks have been around for a long time. The threat landscape keeps evolving, but it's not, there's always new things that happen, but it's not new that passwords are, not the safest way. The thing is that the business priorities are evolving. The organizations are starting to see that this is not just a risk that will cause for a lot of calls to the help desk, because it does, and that does cost a lot of money. Yeah. It actually is something that can all of a sudden conflict with them not meeting regulatory guidelines. And that can cost a lot of money. That also affects their reputation, because all of a sudden the users start wondering, was this a safe place for me to do what I do, right? Is this a good account for me? Should I keep that account? So this is really shifting the mindset, because we've seen these problems with passwords for years, right? Phishing attacks is not something that surfaced last year. Yeah. But businesses are looking at this differently.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And I think, awareness is happening at the consumer level, obviously at the enterprise level, the workforce level, and all these things are happening. There's one more thing I need to add about how FIDO works and how that ties back to passkeys. All right. So this public key cryptography model, FIDO's always had, right? So whereas the term passkey's only been in our mainstream vernacular for 2 years, FIDO's been around for over a decade, right? So this public key cryptography has been built into our specifications, which reflect tens of thousands of hours of development from some of the greatest minds in security and authentication on the planet. That's been around for a long time. Now, the model we always had was that you needed to enroll every device for every service. Right? That's a very strong security model. So if I sign into, say, tshirtshop.com on my iPad, and then I go back to it on my MacBook later on, I need to re-enroll on that MacBook. And on my PC, and on my iPhone, and on my Android, every device had to be enrolled for every service. That is, holding true to the core, way that public key cryptography was designed. What we decided to do just over 2 years ago was tweak this model a little bit in the way that you can implement FIDO2 by allowing that private key not just to be available on that one device, but to be securely synchronized across the cloud. So that's when we started talking about passkeys. When we introduced that ability, we also introduced the term passkey and iconography and the branding and everything with it. What that means now is that not only is your passkey on that first device to sign in on, but it would be readily available across that OS cloud, for example, or you could take it across devices. So meaning that if I go to tshirtshop.com on my MacBook and I show up on my iPad, it will be there automatically. I don't need to re-enroll that device. Likewise, when I go to it on my PC, my Windows machine, I could be prompted for a passkey. Right? I could sign in with my username and say, hey, I see you have a passkey. I could then do cross-device sign-in flow or something like that for me to then basically bootstrap that from that ecosystem to the next. Or I can use, cross-device credential managers like 1Password or Dashlane or Bitwarden. And these are all ways for me to now start allowing this private key to have a little bit more portability, which brings great user benefit in the sense that I never need to use a password. Right? That's the experience that people are anticipating. So the reason why we've seen, billions of accounts being enabled with passkeys, and we've seen hundreds of leading services support passkeys, is this change, because this meets the user experience requirements that they were demanding to use FIDO and to use FIDO at scale, and that's what passkeys are today. So it's a way of implementing FIDO credentials at scale, while also still maintaining the option to have it bound to a single device, like a smart card or a security key or things like that, which is really important in workforce enterprise settings and for higher security settings.
Definitely. Let's talk about that a little bit further. So Kati, over to you. So let's provide some context, especially for some of our listeners who may be more on the physical security side of the house. So let's talk about what's different about this sector compared to traditional / physical security. Bigger question, how are they merging? And then how are standard access control cards used and for with FIDO? So big question, but let's kind of talk about convergence here.
Okay. So I'll start with the first part of your question, and then I'll get to the card bit. So what's good is that you're getting right to the most important point, which is the user experience. Okay, because we often talk about technology as this ideal element. And the great thing with the FIDO Alliance is that it is about those users. It is about that experience. And that's where they start meeting, because historically, you would have the physical access team being part of what you call security. So that's very common in banks. It's very common in bigger enterprise. And they completely acted in silos from the information security side of the business. Now, today, we still see them being separate departments, but they no longer disregard each other's concerns because they can complement each other. Because they also, like I mentioned earlier, there is cost associated with not being ready to properly protect your assets, which today, most of them are digital, right? So that's number one. What we see is that there are three main reasons why they've made the shift. And I talked about business priorities a bit earlier. Okay, so that one, they're considering risks associated with the cybersecurity side to be important enough beyond just what IT needed to think about earlier. And I'm doing this because it's no longer just IT. It's part of the whole business priorities. Number two is the regulations and directives now today are requiring organizations to protect their data. Different states in the United States and different countries or regions like Europe have specific laws that are being implemented for that. So you have that. And we're also seeing many regulators or governmental bodies mentioning phishing-resistant authentication as being the way to go. Sometimes they even mention FIDO technology or passkey. Now, the third is the threat landscape. Okay, this is evolving. It's not like, you thought about the hacker being someone in the basement. Listen, you have threat actors and you have much more. The vast majority of what they do is going after bigger cases and situations that are not just governed by a one person taking an action. They use AI, machine learning, and there are multiplying effects that come into that. And Andrew touched on it. There's a lot of money that associates with that, but we know that 60% of phishing attacks, which is again something that the FIDO technology or passkey helps mitigate, that those attacks, 60% of them result in data being lost or stolen.
Wow.
So there's a reason why this is becoming more important for these organizations today. So quite a lot to consider. Now, on the last piece for the physical access card, I'm going to try not to make this too long, but there are many options. And again, going back to what a user is about, the user's looking to have as easy of a journey as possible. And yes, it would be nice if it's secure. This is how people think, right? If you make it too hard for them to secure something, they will find a way around, right? So you need to make it easy. So that's what they want. Now, there's many ways to get to passwordless, and sometimes you need to find a hybrid way. So you can take the physical access card that you use getting into the door today to be used as a factor that can't be phished, right? To access your logical access things. Now, that's the first step. That's a way to go hybrid, because what you really want is to go with a FIDO technology or PKI, for example, right? Because you want to use the cryptography. So if you want to go there, by already having people using a card that they were already carrying, if you transition next time it's time to update that card with a FIDO card, then that's perfect, because they're already used to it and they're given a true, secure, phishing resistant solution. So we need to realize that the reality is not always going from 0 to 100. It's sometimes something in between, because that's where organizations are today. And some systems, they do require password, right? It's not every application that enables that. And we need to realize that that's where people are. That's where organizations are. But the FIDO Alliance is very good at navigating that, offering multiple options for that. So it's quite an interesting landscape.
Absolutely. It's important just to get the ball rolling in that regard. So I think we've done a really nice job of setting up the past and now the present of FIDO. Andrew, over to you. I would love to get your insights on the future. So what do you see as the future of FIDO technology? What's next?
Well, I think, look, the technology is robust and it's mature. All right. So we're very much at implementation phase. So I don't anticipate major updates to our core user authentication specifications, but things like Katie is talking about here with physical access cards and some combined use cases, I think are really important. So as we pivot as an organization, we're pivoting more and more dollars towards enablement and helping people be successful with their rollouts and understanding, not just how do I use passkeys for billions of consumers, but how do I roll out passkeys for 100,000 employees or 10,000 employees or 1,000 employees or 100 employees, right? These are all important use cases. And I think that, getting people to understand how you can do this today is really important. And I think Katie hit on some really important points, which is that the passwords will persist. Right? So I think there's too much emphasis on password lists and not enough emphasis on less passwords. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. Right. So let's start, inside your enterprise, inside your organization, start thinking about how do I rely less on passwords and take them out of play. And where I need to use them, very sure that I'm backing them up with a physical card as a second factor. Or if I'm using a SSO tool like a Duo or Okta or something like that, my MFA choice there is using FIDO, something unphishable. So I think that's critical. So getting people to understand these tips and tricks for rolling out FIDO authentication is more and more where we'll be focusing on, just from a resource standpoint in enablement. I mentioned Passkey Central as another thing. Beyond that, though, I think that we're doing some really exciting work that's adjacent to user authentication. We just announced review draft specifications of our credential exchange protocol. This is interesting work about how you can securely exchange passkeys or other protocols between credential managers. We're doing really important work in device onboarding and IoT devices. So, think about the problems that we've just talked about with passwords for consumers. There's billions, if not trillions of connected devices out there that historically have dependent on passwords. So we have our FIDO device onboard specification and protocol, which essentially is taking the password out of onboarding edge and networked devices. So this is important in the enterprise and also in smart cities and things like that, where you have network devices that need to be brought onto a network, ideally without using a password, both from a security and efficiency standpoint. And lastly, we're doing some real interesting certification work with targeted at identity verification and onboarding. So how do you actually, and this ties back to passkeys. Passkeys are part of the identity lifecycle, but also, there's the account creation and the account recovery piece. So I create my account, I sign into my account, and if I lose my credential, I need to recover my account. Now, passkeys help address the recovery piece, but they don't do anything for onboarding, really, right? For secure onboarding. And so in most enterprise settings or higher assurance settings, you need to have some sort of proofing activity. More and more companies are doing this remotely. We think it's really important that they do so fully aware of the rising threats of generative AI, synthetic identity and things like that. So we have a certification program that certifies vendors who are providing solutions for remote identity verification, which is typically a video thing like this, to make sure that they are meeting requisite performance standards for false accept rate, false reject rate, presentation attack detection, which is like spoof detection, and also bias detection. They talk about biometrics. You can't go too far down that path without talking about bias. So we actually test for that as well. So any system that passes these certification thresholds means that they're addressing all these things. And so now an enterprise who's looking to securely onboard someone can look for a product that is IDV certified from FIDO Alliance that will then complement their commitment to passkeys and will help with more secure remote recovery as well. So those are some of the things we're looking at in the future, Matt. But ultimately, our focus is on getting passkeys rolled out at scale. And there is a lot of work to be done still today in smoothing out some of the UX issues that we're facing. All right. So, like I said, FIDO technology has been around for over a decade, but passkeys, as we've introduced them, have been around for just about 2 years. They're still relatively new. The support in operating systems and browsers and devices is still relatively new. So we work arm in arm with the platform providers and the device manufacturers to identify UX issues and smooth those out. And that's where a lot of our technical focus is as well.
Very nice. Lots to look forward to. Let's come back to the present. Now, Katie, with this being a pretty serious priority and a lot of benefits there across the board, what do you see that's blocking people from deploying FIDO or passkeys in their enterprise? Are there any misconceptions that we can address and help move this ball forward faster?
Yeah. So that's actually a perfect segue to talk about the research that we did together, well, that the FIDO Alliance did, and HID is one of the sponsors, is we actually spoke with 400 decision makers, both in the United States, so 200 in the United States and 200 in the UK, to better understand two things. One, if you haven't implemented passkeys, what's blocking you? Two, if you have, tell us more about what went well, the decisions behind it. And here's the thing, we only had 13% out of these 400 people that said, actually, I'm being blocked or I've made a decision not to move forward with the project. And the top two things were, it's not secure enough and it's going to be cumbersome for our users. Here's the great thing though, the 87%, so the rest of the people that answered actually clarified that the top three things that made this project successful is user experience got better, security got better, but here's the third one that's actually, the cherry on top is user productivity. So employee productivity went up by over 70%. Wow. So it was so healthy for us to ask these questions because sometimes we discredit people having a misconception, but we're dealing with humans here. So it's quite important for us to realize that if we don't address, even if something is incorrect and we don't give it attention, we're never going to be able to increase adoption. So that's kind of the sum of that piece. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. And bonus question, what do you think is driving those misconceptions? I mean, you've got a complete opposite between the 13% and the 87%, but they're seeing from different sheets of music. So what do you think are driving some of those misconceptions?
It's people not trying. There's also a concern about doing something new. Again, the importance of what you were going at earlier, right? Are you going to make people use something they're not used to carrying, right? Andrew talked about passkeys being possibly something you can have on mobile. We talked about it being something that can be on a card or a key. So if you start addressing this from a way that a user wouldn't be as concerned, the people that make the decisions wouldn't perhaps have the same level of concern around it. But again, it's about the business priorities. It's no longer just about IT anymore. It's no longer about a general password concern that it's cumbersome and creating help desk calls. This is about the business priorities. So it's coming, and we're seeing very high adoption rates. And Andrew, I know that we have some really nice numbers this year that we've seen throughout. So,
Andrew, anything you want to add to that question? Blockers, obstacles, objections?
I mean, change management is always an issue,
Mm.
right? So change is hard. No one likes change. So that, especially if you're like a CISO or working in a CISO's office where you have a priority list, that's increasingly and incredibly long. But I think that, more and more what we're seeing is a lot of interest in deploying passkeys inside the workforce. And we did run this study that we haven't shared all the data yet, but we're seeing very positive signals here that, the vast majority of people, first of all, everyone's aware of passkeys, which is great. Awareness is a starting point. But I see data such as, 2/3 people who have not yet deployed passkeys say it's likely that they'll continue to do so in the future. So I think we're seeing, and also a decline in usage of, once passkeys are deployed, a decline in usage of non, passkey options. And so time and time again, we're seeing more and more companies understand the imperative of moving to address the primary threat vector that's out there, which is remains social engineering, and credential type attacks, and that's the first step towards broader attacks such as ransomware and things like that. So there's good awareness out there. There's good interest in moving towards FIDO-based solutions, and I think we'll continue to see growth. And earlier, Katie was talking about access cards, physical access cards as a means of providing a FIDO-based solution. I think that's absolutely a great use case for, where you can have the same card that gets you in the building, gets you into your system. We've also seen a lot of companies just kind of throw everything at the wall, right? So like meet users where they are, right? So give them a physical access card, but also give them a security key or let them use an app, right? There's all sorts of ways. I mean, so the FIDO protocols are flexible enough in the last mile, if you will, or how users actually authenticate. They can give users a variety of choices, none of which rely on passwords or only passwords, right? So you can take the password out of play, or you can use FIDO as a second factor if you need to. But there's a variety of ways of arming your workforce with FIDO solutions. I think that flexibility is really important. It also taps back into, I was talking earlier about our FIDO certified program. There's FIDO certified, HID is FIDO certified authenticators. There's other authenticators out there too. There's servers, there's apps, all these things work together, because they're all writing to common protocols, they're all certified, and they test their interoperability, which gives, again, the CISO and CISO's office, whoever's implementing this, more control, more flexibility in how they roll out this FIDO-based solution to address the threats that are here today and that continue to emerge in the world.
Andrew, you mentioned that change is hard. So let's be change agents. Katie, how would you recommend that people get started with FIDO? What resources are out there, and how do they build the business case? Help the people out. What can they do?
What can they do? Yeah. So let's focus on the enterprise side, because I think that's most relevant for our audience. First, you need to look at what use case you have. Okay. Is your workforce mostly, on the front lines, meeting customers all the time? Do you mostly have people traveling frequently? Are they most office-based? Do you have a mix? So that's very important to identify first. And then you need to achieve, to have clear targets of what you want to achieve. So what's your business objective driving this? And then you make decisions on metrics and how you want to measure, because Andrew talked about the challenge of change. But here's the thing. Very often you'll have FIDO passkeys in different shapes or forms, like we've been talking about, being enabled. But then it takes time for people to want to adopt it, right? So you can fast forward that by making sure that you understood how they would use it. And how is password making their lives harder today, making sure that they understand how this would be eliminated with this. And if you choose the right method, you'll get there. The third piece is that you shouldn't, unless you have a very special case, do everything at once. You need to pick users that are ideal to start this with. And we asked these 400 people, and they told us that their primary focus in majority was to pick different people that were adapt to adopting, but in different departments. So they didn't go and choose, okay, let's go with everybody in IT that has top admin access, because those are very special cases, right? They're very adapt to using the technology and they'll be willing, but will it really represent the challenges that you're going to face later on? Most likely not. So that's quite important to start there. And then from there, you can trickle. The last piece is give yourself some options, just reiterating what Andrew said, because don't go a one size fits all, right? It's not just about not starting everything at once, but also don't try to do everything the same for everybody, unless, again, your workforce all have the same type of situation, because you need to give yourself options to either how you are today and opportunity to grow further later. So you want to talk to others that have done it before and see, but those are the steps that we've seen confirmed by the survey and by experience, obviously, through the Alliance.
Very helpful. Andrew, I see you nodding. Anything you want to add or reinforce on let's help the people get started? What do you have to say?
What Katie said. No, you nailed it. I think to get started, and sometimes it's daunting. This is just kind of a human thing, right? Sometimes it's like, oh, God, how do I get going on this? Like, I know where I want to get to, and I want to take passwords out of the hands of all my employees all over the world. But you can't get there without addressing, getting started. Work on build a business case, identify a segment of users that you can start with. We have resources on the FIDO Alliance website to help you with this stuff. And Passkey Central has a lot of good, horizontal kind of generic information about passkeys. Now, it's not the primary use case it looks at is the consumer use case, but 80% of the content there is applicable to workforce as well. And by the way, we're adding, workforce content to that site, so check back frequently. Other resource we provide is we have a lot of peer-to-peer guidance and expertise inside the Alliance. So for those of you who are not yet members, consider getting involved. We have working groups that literally are comprised of enterprise practitioners, and they meet. It's almost like a support group, and it's a very positive collegial type thing where you can actually learn from each other about best practices and compare notes, and then based on what you learn, then share that onwards. So I think these are all things that are out there to help people with their learning, and to help accelerate them along their journey.
Very cool. The help is out there. Just got to go seek it. That's excellent. And with experts like y'all, that makes it a lot easier as well. So very good stuff. Okay, so let's summarize. And how we end every episode is we reinforce and ask you the burning question for today. So Andrew, we'll start with you. What is FIDO, which we've discussed, but more importantly, how will it shape the future of authentication?
Well, so we talked about what FIDO is, and I did so ad nauseum, so I'm not going to go through that again. It's shaping the future of authentication and what it is today, right? So we're taking passwords out of play. And so never forget the problem statement, right? Passwords are the problem statement. And so the less we use passwords, the more safe we are. And we can be, we as consumers, we can be we as a company, we as citizens. The good news is we're seeing adoption across the board. Right, we're seeing government adoption for e-citizen services. We're seeing workforce adoption and people using tokens and security keys from HID and other vendors at massive scale. We're seeing consumer sites start to take the passwords out of our daily life. At the end of the day, we're all consumers. And so whether you're using a passkey on Amazon or Uber or TikTok, whatever you might be doing, little by little, we are actually making dramatic changes in the usability and security of our daily lives. So I think that's our future. Is more of that at scale. It's still early days, right? So it was kind of cool. Like we had our Authenticate conference last month, and I mentioned that so many of the top 100 sites in the world are using passkeys. For technology, it's only been out there for less than 2 years. And imagine if this is a business. If you have an early adopter list that looks like that, that's quite a good start. But there's a very long tail, huge long tail of companies that have yet to start their FIDO journey. And that it pertains to consumer and it pertains to workforce, right? And so what we want to do is make sure that long tail can get their needs met as well. So whether that's a mid-sized e-commerce company or more likely or more germane, medium-sized enterprises, SMBs, or large enterprises who have just yet to get moving, we want to make sure they get moving down that path by working with the FIDO certified community to make sure their employees and their customers are fully secure.
Very good. Kati, same question. How will FIDO shape the future of authentication?
Well, first of all, it's not just a buzzword anymore, right? And what it's doing for the future is that the users and the way they experience accessing their accounts and their information is, for the first time, being the top priority. It's not, and it's securing it has been something that passwords tried to do for a long time. So that's that. But the last piece I would say is it's merging the security space in a very interesting way. Security professionals are not just looking at this as this buzzword anymore. Even though you'll have professionals that work in other areas, they're aware, because you know what? Just like you've seen in the banking space for years, the way people log into a Netflix account or to, another very easy to access or create account, they want it at work. They want it at the bank. They want that easy way to work. And that's what this is doing. Now, sky's the limit on how far it's going to take us. But this is what this is doing. It's putting the users front and center in a very beneficial way.
Very nice. Exciting times ahead. Well, team, thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. So Kati, Andrew, thank you both so much for joining us. It's been a true pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And as always, my friends, an even bigger thanks to you for joining us for this episode. We always enjoy putting this podcast together and hope that you equally enjoy listening. Now, we'll be back next week with yet another burning question on another hot industry topic. Speaking of which, to be the first to know when new episodes are published all season long, be sure to subscribe to HID Connects. Doing so will ensure that you stay connected, and you can subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And while you're out there, be sure to rate, review, like this podcast. You can also subscribe on YouTube and check us out on social. And in the spirit of connection, please send me your questions and topic ideas for future episodes. We're always planning ahead. All you have to do is drop me a line at media@hidglobal.com. So until next time, thanks again for listening. May your identities forever be secure.